This happened when I was in high school. It happened on a Saturday. That day, it had been raining non-stop since the morning. With little other options, I just texted my friends and played some online games with them. Before I knew it, it was the afternoon, and the rain hadn't shown any signs of letting up. When it got to around 7 p.m., I gave up all hope of going out for the day. It was still hammering down out there. I was lounging around watching TV at home, and there was an interruption to the scheduled program. It was a local warning, which told residents to be aware of potential flooding. We got that warning, I guess, at around 8 p.m. My family of 6 were all huddled in the living room together. We were just carrying on our night. I don't know why, but none of us seemed that worried by the warnings on TV. I don't know how long we sat there, but after a while, I heard a dull clicking sound, and then everything went dark. We were in pitch black darkness. My father stumbled off towards his bedroom, mumbling something about going to get a torch. He lit the way using the torch on his smartphone. My mother got up to look outside. The power seemed to have been knocked out for our whole neighborhood. It was so dark in the house, it almost seemed to amplify the sound of falling rain. It was still showing no signs of letting up, and it made me think about those warnings we heard earlier. Some of my family got up to find lights or to head back to their bedrooms to look out of the windows or to look for candles and battery-operated things like radios and torches. I stayed in the living room with my grandma for a while, and she said that we might need to evacuate if things get worse. I wanted to go get my phone so I could tell my friends what was going on, so I went back into my room and grabbed it. I was scrolling through some social media, and then I noticed that my battery was a little low, so I thought to myself, better stop and save the battery. I just spent some of the time looking out at the rainfall, listening to it. It was pretty relaxing, even though I was, and still am, a bit of a night owl. I started to feel sleepy. I remembered that I had an old battery charger in a drawer somewhere. I found that and put my phone on charge and killed time by reading a manga by torchlight. By that time, I heard no TV on downstairs, no chatter of the family. Everything was quiet. I guessed that the elders in my family had decided to get an early night. Maybe the rain wasn't going to be as bad as they said it would be on TV. It was about 10 p.m. when I heard the doorbell ring. It was late. We never really heard the doorbell ring at that time of night, but I guessed this was a different set of circumstances. I thought it might be our neighbor, Mr. Saito. He might have come over to see how we were all doing or to give us some information. Someone might be telling us that it was time to go, time to evacuate. I left my bedroom on the second floor and headed downstairs. I was surprised that it looked like I was to be the one who was to go and open the door. Maybe everyone else was still sound asleep. As I headed downstairs, I noticed something. There was a huge shadow behind the frosted glass of our front door. It looked very big and not like my neighbor. But just in case, I called out his name. Mr. Saito? Whoever that shadow belonged to behind the glass didn't reply. It just stood there. I started to get scared at that point because I knew it wasn't my neighbor or anyone else who was here to help, because why would you just stand there in silence? It looked like it was staring at me. Before I knew it, I found myself backing away from the door. I saw the figure shift from side to side as if it was about to try the door. It was like my mind went blank. I ran as fast as I could upstairs to the safety of my room, and I slammed the door and stood behind it. And that was the first time in my life that I literally stood stock still, unable to think rationally, just in a pure panic. The doorbell rang again, and it felt as if my heart was about to flatline. I still remember it very vividly. Even when I think back on it nowadays, I can still see that dark figure behind the door. Just after the doorbell, I heard my father making noises downstairs. Finally, someone is up. I felt now brave enough to leave my bedroom and to listen to what was going on from the hallway. I leaned over the banisters and saw my grandfather and grandmother were joining my father down there in the lounge. I went down a few stairs to be in earshot, and I heard my dad say, "The doorbell rang, right?" Everyone was in agreement. Great, I wasn't hearing things. That's good. I fearfully looked towards the front door and I saw that the shadow was gone. That was really good. I was scared of thieves, you know? Opportunistic thieves that might be looking at breaking into homes. Some people in town might have already evacuated and their homes were stood unoccupied. A perfect chance for someone looking to break in. Then I heard the doorbell ring again for the third time. I watched as my grandpa opened the door. He must have gotten to the door in about 3 seconds, but by the time the door was open, there was no one out there. Grandpa quickly shut the door and I swear I saw a dark shadow pass by once more. Someone was out there. They probably weren't scared that the person they saw from wherever they hid was pretty old, and they probably thought that they could take Grandpa on if they had to. My dad was shocked. I could see the fear on his face as he ran upstairs right past me to wake up my mum and sister. My dad gathered all of us in the living room. Just as he was telling us to calm down, we heard a tremendous noise coming from outside. I heard tree limbs snapping and the sliding of something heavy. We lived in the shade of a big mountain, and I know now that what I heard was the sound of a landslide. The mud, boulders and trees on the mountain were soon to be heading towards our town on a river of rainfall. My dad was screaming, "Everyone in the car, let's go," you know, stuff like that. We should have given more respect to the warnings we had heard on TV. I was thinking, please let us get out of here safe, and I promise I'll learn my lesson. I was young and terrified. I don't know who I was even pleading to. We piled into the car, and there were clumps of earth in the streets, sand everywhere. It was a real mess. Everything was just coming down, and the water was so fast, it was honestly terrifying. The roads were treacherous, but my dad managed to navigate through the path of destruction, and we got far enough away to feel safe. We later learned that our family home had suffered many damages. I'm certain that if we delayed leaving any longer, then any one of us could have been potentially swept away in the flood. It was a real close call. My grandpa has a theory, and it's one that I'm happy to buy into. I think everyone in our family believes it, but I guess to different extents. His theory goes like this. It wasn't a criminal at the door trying the doorbell. He said that it was our guardian spirit, because if it wasn't for that doorbell ringing, then I guess that none of us would have woken up, apart from me, and to be honest, I was content in hiding in my room, and I wouldn't have been able to evacuate the family. Had it not been for the doorbell, we might not have made it out to the car in time. We might have been trapped in our house, or we might have even been washed away in the floods. Come to think of it, should doorbells in houses ring when there's a blackout? I'm lucky to be here. I think we all are. So if that was a guardian spirit, thank you. I'm one of those people who totally freezes up when something unexpected happens. I learned that about myself when I visited a rundown department store. It happened to me not that long ago. I went to a department store in a city while I was passing through. It looked pretty okay from the outside, but when I got a little closer, I changed my opinion. It was kind of small and a lot older than I expected. I mean, it was practically stuck in the 70s. It was in dire need of a facelift. I thought I might as well still check it out, since I had turned into the parking lot. Another thing I guess that is worth mentioning is the fact that it was a weekday and it was raining. I thought that there wouldn't be that many customers. I could be in and out pretty quickly. The men's section was up on the 5th floor, so I headed there first. They actually had a great selection. I picked up a couple of bargains and started for the elevator. There were 2 passengers on board when the doors to the elevator opened. Sometimes in high-class malls, there are elevator attendants who ask you what floor you want to go to. Yeah, sadly there wasn't one. I kind of expected that. But it would have been nice to see a babe in there, huh? I love their outfits. I imagined that they might have had one in days gone by. So like I was saying, I was on the 5th floor. I boarded the elevator, and the 2 other passengers got out, leaving me alone in the elevator. The elevator continued its descent to the 3rd floor. And then, all of a sudden, the lights went out, and the whir of electricity went silent. It looked to me like a power cut, and that made me feel very nervous. Since I was the only one in the elevator, I didn't hold back my thoughts on the situation. I used some pretty interesting expletives that day, and I'm glad no one was listening. When the cloud of frustration had lifted, I was left in a strange and increasingly frightening situation. I was stuck in the dark in an elevator. I was pretty certain that the elevator was older than I was. At that point, I remember trying to convince myself that the elevator would start moving at any moment, and I was very concerned for my safety. In my head, I thought it could suddenly drop at any moment as well. As much as I tried to believe that I wouldn't be stuck in what essentially was a metal coffin for much longer, I couldn't shake the feeling that it would be a long time before I saw light. And that got me thinking, because I thought that emergency lights, at the very least, would come on if there was an elevator malfunction. So I guess that strengthened my belief in the fact that it was a power outage, a blackout, quite literally. I cursed the store, its ancient elevator, and myself for even turning into the parking lot to check it out. All these thoughts happened pretty quickly. I wasn't in the dark long. I pulled out my smartphone to give myself some light. When I could see, and it was brighter, I actually managed to calm myself down a little. I was stood with my back against the innermost wall of the elevator. I don't know why I did that, maybe it was instinct. I was fixated on my phone. But as you might expect, I didn't get a signal in a 1970s elevator, nor did the department store provide Wi-Fi, so in effect, the phone was little more than an expensive light source. I looked up from my phone and casually towards the doors, and I got the fright of my life when I saw someone there. I was really shocked. I thought I was alone in the elevator. I was certain that it was a woman, in front of me because of her frame and her long hair. She had her back facing towards me. She was wearing a nice dress. I was certain that I wasn't seeing things, but I was also certain that I was alone in there only a few moments ago. This is where I bring you back to my previous statement. I am one of those people who just totally freezes up when something unexpected happens. Now, it may have only been a couple of seconds that I froze for, but I did it nonetheless. I didn't want to look at her, yet I couldn't look away. But in my heart, I just kept praying to all the known gods, please don't let her turn around and look at me. Please don't let her turn around and look at me. If I just stayed perfectly still, then maybe she wouldn't notice me. A few random thoughts passed through my head. Am I on a prank TV show? Am I hallucinating because of the lead paint in this place or something? Random thoughts, like I say. Do people lose their minds when they see something like this? Is this why people's hair turns white and why people get locked up in mental asylums? Next, I did something that is probably going to sound completely mad. I locked my phone and put it in my pocket. I was afraid of the light. I thought that she might notice the light and look towards me, and then I knew I'd lose it if she looked towards me. But my eyes slowly grew accustomed to the darkness, and shapes and silhouettes slowly began to reveal themselves to me. And she was there. She was still there, standing with her back facing me and her head facing the corner where all the buttons were. Meanwhile, I was still where I was, only now sweating and on the verge of hyperventilation, but determined not to make a sound. Just at the moment, I had almost managed to convince myself that I was seeing things. I saw her head move. She still kept her back turned towards me, but now she was moving slightly closer to the control panel. It didn't look like walking, it looked smoother. There was no sound. It was like watching something on mute. I started shaking. I thought that I was about to scream. I just didn't know what to do. It looked like she was pressing the buttons. Nothing happened though. Then I heard her, almost as if she was in my mind speaking. I heard her ask, "What floor did you fall from?" In the dark, she turned to me, and I saw hollowed, sunken eyes, black sockets, just when I thought that I was about to scream and shout my lungs out as I drew in breath. It felt like the lights came on. And at the same time the lights were on, I heard a voice state, "To all our customers, we apologize for the inconvenience. We have suffered a temporary power cut, but we're all back up and running now." I looked towards the corner of the elevator where I had seen the woman, and she was gone. The doors opened, at I think the 3rd floor, and I got the hell out of there as fast as I could. I looked up the store on a couple of websites trying to find some local news or something, but I didn't get much. However, I did find something on Oshima Teru. Hi, Jay here. Oshima Teru is a website in Japan that shows you locations of accident properties. I go into depth on this topic in my accident property video, which I will link below. Anyways, back to the story. I found that there was a little flame mark which indicated something went down in that mall. Apparently, a young woman took her life by jumping from the roof. I guess that, unfortunately, that isn't uncommon for buildings like the one I was in. I guess that if those walls could tell stories, they'd tell a fair few. Well, after that, I never went back to that department store again, and I get anxiety riding the elevator alone these days. I will never forget that voice, or that remnant of a face I saw in the darkness. Hi, Jay here, just to say that karaoke in Japan is usually in a room where you and your friends and family rent it for a predetermined amount of time. You can pick whatever you want to sing and have drinks and snacks delivered to your room. It's pretty amazing. You don't have to get up and sing in front of others in a bar. You pay at the end and it's always a fun time. Anyway, here's the next story. This happened one Saturday afternoon. I went to karaoke with a couple of friends in a little area of our small town. We liked going to the karaoke because on the same floor there was a game center, arcades basically. It was all on the 2nd floor of a building downtown. The karaoke and the arcade were very popular on the weekend, and that Saturday afternoon was no exception. We were pretty lucky to get a karaoke room, but we did. We were in there for about an hour, I guess, until something happened. Our song cut out halfway. So did the aircon, and so did the lights. Luckily it was the middle of the day, as we might have freaked out. We looked at one another, my friends and I, and we just smirked at the unusual situation we found ourselves in. I didn't think it would take long for the power to come back on. Someone would fix it. Quick as, soon as. I was wrong though, because as the minutes crawled by, we remained in the dark. I think that about 5 minutes or so went by, and we realized that it wasn't going to be a quick fix. It was weird, and it was ruining the vibe. Well, I didn't want to just sit there, so I told my friends that I'd head on down to the front desk to see what was going on. As soon as I left the karaoke room, my heart started to pound in my chest. Something was off. Something more than the power was off. I knew what it was immediately. The other karaoke rooms were silent. But not just that, the arcade and all the machines were silent as well. It was really busy earlier. It was eerily quiet in there now. I just thought about getting to the front desk to see if we could get the power on. Even if all the customers went outside, there must be someone at the front desk, right? I mean, they wouldn't just leave us in there alone, would they? I got to the front desk, and to my surprise, it was completely unmanned. There was no one there, no sign of life. There was, however, some form of light there. An emergency exit light gave off a faint glow. I stood there thinking, what the hell happened? It was like I was on the set of some apocalyptic movie. I didn't know what was going on, but I knew whatever it was wasn't good. I got my friends and I told them that we should go. I showed them the completely empty karaoke and games arcade. We gathered up our bags and purses and headed out. We left the money for the karaoke at the front desk. I was feeling completely anxious. I really wanted to go home. I started looking around, kind of fearfully. I didn't understand the reason why this place was suddenly empty, but I guessed that it had something to do with the blackout. I looked over towards the source of light that I mentioned earlier. The dimly lit emergency exit light. I saw something when I looked over there. I saw a figure moving in the darkness. There was something moving, something back there. It was just out of sight, just behind the claw machine. It looked like a human, but a solid black shadow version. I said to my friends, "Now that we left the money, can we go?" We were all getting nervous. And now I made the mistake of pointing out what I saw to my friends, and we hit the button for the elevator while we waited for it. We couldn't wait but look on over at that figure again. It was doing this weird kind of twisty movement, like a kind of dance. It was scuttling between the game machines in the arcade. It was scampering between them to remain hidden, all the while doing weird, twisting, dancing movements. It was dark. I couldn't see it perfectly. But that's what I thought I saw. It seemed like it was getting closer and closer to us, and my friend shouted, "Let's take the stairs." I don't know why the thought of taking the stairs hadn't crossed over our minds. I mean, we were in the middle of a power cut. We managed to get out of there safely, but we ran like we hadn't ever ran before. We didn't stop until we made it to my friend's house. Thankfully, she lived pretty close by. When we calmed down a little, we sat around talking about all kinds of things. We tried to rationally explain what happened to us, but we couldn't come up with anything logical. But we couldn't come up with any logical answers or conclusions. It felt like we had suffered some simultaneous nightmare. It was like we had a shared memory of some horrible dream. It didn't seem like what happened that afternoon was possible, yet there we were, discussing it from every angle. We never figured it out, but we did summon up the courage to go back to the karaoke place one day. Nothing else happened though. We did ask if they remembered the recent power cut, but the staff member I spoke to, and I'm certain that he was the one on duty that day too, he just shook his head to indicate no. It was very weird. Did the power cut happen? Yes, I'm certain of that. That's about the only thing I am certain of, to be honest. I have no idea what the hell that dancing shadow thing was, and I have no interest in finding out. It was like we were all spirited away that day. It happened way back when I was in college. This year, it will be 12 years ago. Like I said, I was in university. Hachioji, actually, in Tokyo. I was staying with a relative. I really didn't want to. I felt like I was missing out on my college experience. It was like I was a young adult who still had a bedtime. Oh, and on top of that, my aunt didn't even live anywhere near campus. It took like an hour to get to uni, and then an hour back. Luckily, a former high school classmate of mine lived in Nishi Hachioji, which was just to the west of campus. He went to a different college though. So on the night that this experience took place, I decided to stop off at my friend's place. By the way, my friend lived on the 5th floor of a 6-story building. It was a dark night, a real standard autumn night. My friend was lying on his bed listening to music, and I was playing some game on the PS. I don't remember the name of it, but I remember it was a golf game. All of a sudden there was a dull click, and then the lights, the power, went out. At the time I didn't get freaked out or anything. I thought that we had just overloaded, or someone in the building had overloaded the electricity. So I asked my friend where the breaker was so we could figure things out. It wasn't just one thing that went out, but everything went out. The circuit breaker wasn't actually in my friend's apartment, it was outside of it. It was in the hall, in a sheltered box thing. So we stepped out, and we flipped all the switches, and then everything came back on. I was back to gaming, and then not 5 minutes later, the power was cut again. Well, now it was weird, because I don't think my friend and I were using too much energy. I went out to my friend's balcony, and took a look down to see if any of the other apartments below were out of power. I saw a few lights on down there. The building clearly wasn't out of power. It wasn't a blackout. So whatever was happening was just affecting my friend's place. I called my friend out to the balcony to see what he thought. and as we were talking out there, we heard the doorbell ring. My friend was a really popular guy, and I guess that his place gave off hangout spot kind of vibes, you know? So when we heard the doorbell ring, he just mumbled something like, someone else has come over, and he went to answer it. I was a little suspicious. I thought someone might be messing with us. I guess that someone was playing Ding Dong Ditch or Knock Donk Ginger. We call it Ding Dong Dash here. He went to the door, and there was no one there. It was weird, but I thought that he might have a friend who was pranking him or something. You know, lights going out, Ding Dong Dash, might be coincidence. Well, with that in mind, I went out and flipped the switches in the breaker once again. It was annoying and weird, but I was kind of locked into staying over my friend's house at that point, and there wasn't much I could do about the situation. As soon as I came back into his apartment and walked over to my friend, I heard the doorbell ringing behind me again. I looked at my friend, and then the breaker tripped again, and we were plunged back into darkness. While we were in the dark, the doorbell rang again. I raced over to the door at that point. I really wanted to catch whoever was messing with us out. There was no one there, so I stepped out into the communal hallway to look around. I was looking for any kind of shadow moving, or maybe even the elevator going up or down. But there was no one out there. I couldn't hear a thing either. Even though there was no one around, I didn't feel like being in the hallway. It freaked me out. So I headed back into my friend's apartment, and my friend said to me, "Something's wrong, isn't it?" Then, as if to answer his question, the doorbell rang again. I won't lie, like I imagine some people do when they recount experiences like this, my friend and I hugged one another in fear. I'm not embarrassed, it was scary. I felt his body trembling. We reluctantly opened the front door to confront whoever was messing with us, only to find out again that there was no one out there. My friend suddenly got this idea in his head that we were being disturbed by something paranormal. He grabbed some salt. I went with him into the kitchen. Neither of us wanted to be alone, or far apart from one another. There in the dark, he started shaking salt all over the place. I could hear it scattering all around. He covered himself in it and dashed some on me. He was really worked up at that point. We went out onto the balcony, and he was putting salt into the palm of his hand and eating it. He encouraged me to do the same. I didn't think that we were being messed with by a spirit. I thought that we were being messed with by a very real human being. Why would someone do that? I'm not sure. Maybe we were being too noisy and it was one of his neighbors. Maybe it was one of his friends who was playing a prank that went a little too far and they didn't want to own up to it. Or maybe it was just a total stranger. Someone who just wanted to see how frightened they had made us, or figure out how many of us were in the apartment before deciding to do something else. I mean, this is all speculation on my part, because that's all I have. We don't know what happened that night, and we likely never will. All I know is that the circuit breaker was tripped multiple times, causing the power outage, and I think it wasn't due to us overloading the power. I think a human hand flipped the switches and pressed the doorbell. After that night, staying at my aunt's didn't seem so bad for a while. Nothing else happened to my friend, so he believes his little cleansing ritual with the salt paid off and warded away whatever came to the door that night. It was a night to remember. I still think it was the work of some weirdo, and the only reason it didn't go further was because they saw two able-bodied men and not someone alone. This one is a bit of fun, alright? I heard from a buddy of mine who visited New York that there was a major power outage in a 60-story hotel one night of his stay there. He was amazed at the size of the place, as I'm sure most people are, when they see the skyscrapers of New York. He was there with a business partner to broker a deal that went very well apparently. The pair of businessmen celebrated in the hotel restaurant. It was situated on the first floor. However, halfway through dinner, their celebrations were cut short because the power to the building was also cut. There was a sudden power outage. A member of staff who the businessmen quickly found out was the manager, went from table to table announcing that the meals would be complimentary due to the unforeseen circumstances. They tried to make their guests' nights a little more convenient, I guess. Well, the two gentlemen were more than happy with that arrangement. They had brokered a great deal and had a free meal, cash back. One small hitch though. Their room was on the 58th floor, and due to the power outage, the blackout, the elevator was out of order. The only way up was via the stairs. Well, that must have been a horrible realization, but one of them said to the other, "Hey, since it's dark and it's a long climb up to our floor, let's talk. I want to hear the scariest thing that's ever happened to you, or the scariest thing you've ever heard. Come on, the setting tonight seems perfect for scary stories, don't you agree?" Well, it didn't sound like that bad of an idea to the other one, so he said yes, and they began their ascent while regaling one another with stories. So there they went, floor by floor, telling scary stories to one another, ones they had heard and some they had experienced themselves. They were pleased that they could put a half-decent spin on a bad situation. I guess that's why they worked so well in business together. They headed on up, and finally, after a long while, they reached the 57th floor. One turned to the other and said, "Well, here we are, pal. Nearly back to the room, and I'm all out of scary stories. It's been fun." The other guy stopped and faced him and said, "I thought I was out of scary stories, but I have one more to share. Probably the scariest you'll hear tonight, considering the situation." The other guy thinks to himself, "Well, I told him about my neighbor who was held at gunpoint, my cousin who got carjacked, and my mother's story of how she was certain that she was living in a haunted house when she was fresh out of college. What the hell is he going to tell me next?" And he said to his pal in a low voice, "All right then, tell me, but this better be scary." And his friend replied, "Oh, I promise it's scary. We forgot to pick up our keys to the room at the front desk." This happened when I worked for a relatively small company. I worked in a quiet little office. I was new and pretty eager to impress. I had something big on the next day, and I think it was a presentation or something. I wanted to stay late and do some overtime in order to be properly prepared for the presentation the following morning. Usually the president of the company would be in the office until everyone left. He was a real workaholic. However, that night, and at that point it was night, by the way, we were pulling some crazy hours. That night he wasn't there. I can't remember exactly what, but I think he was doing something else, which meant he couldn't be there. I got an email from him at one point, and I told him that I'd be working overtime. I remember not getting that email too late. I had almost gotten all that I needed to get done after about an hour and a half later. I just needed to check over my work. The finish line was in sight. And in order to check, I needed a fresh cup of coffee. I stood up in the office. As I pulled my chair backwards, I realized that I hadn't looked up for a while. It was the first time that I was in the office alone, so it was kind of liberating. I guess I could do whatever I wanted. I decided to play some music through my phone. Back then, if you wanted music on your phone, you had to manually put it on your phone through a cable to your laptop or computer. I found the song I wanted to hear and I pressed play. Not 10 seconds into the song, I heard 3 knocks in quick succession against the entrance door to the office. I grabbed my phone and shut off the music. I thought to myself, "Oh God, someone's going to complain now." Almost forgetting that it was late, and that we were not exactly operating in business hours. What I mean by that is, I failed to remember that there would be no good reason why someone would be knocking at the office door. I froze, but I knew that we had a little monitor system by the door at the reception that showed outside of the door. I wandered over it to take a look at who was knocking, but there was no one out there. I was scared. I was alone in the office, and I was only a 20-year-old female. If this was going to be a break-in, then I don't think I could have done anything to stop them, to protect the company's properties. I felt defenseless. I hoped whoever was knocking would just go away. I was terrified to hear another bunch of knocks. I thought that would be the worst thing imaginable at that point, but I was wrong. The knocks didn't come. But all of a sudden, the power went out. I couldn't help but feel scared. I traced my way back to my desk using my hands to guide me, and I found my mobile phone on the desk, and I called my boss. I was shaking with fear. I didn't want someone to break in. Now that I had my phone, I wanted to get the hell out of there. I didn't care about that final proofread anymore. I went to get up from my office chair, but I felt a dead weight against my left leg. I thought that I had just wrapped it around my handbag or my umbrella, but then I knew that wasn't it. I felt hands, grasping hands, wrap around my leg. They gripped on tight. I looked down and aimed the dim light from my phone's home screen towards my legs. I swear it looked like a woman's arms. I screamed and I screamed. I kicked frantically. I saw her head turn, and I thought that the owner of those hands was about to face me, and I knew deep down I didn't want to look into her eyes. I ran through the formation of empty desks in the dark, clattering my limbs against them. I had too much adrenaline in my body to care about any damage I did to myself. I stopped by the door, remembering that banging sound I heard earlier, and just froze in place. I slumped in a corner for a few moments, until I heard the sound of a chair moving somewhere in the back of the office near my desk. That was it for me. I got out of there as soon as I could. I did actually get a call back from my boss later, just to check in, as he didn't hear from me and had a missed call. He said that he called the office a couple of times and my phone was engaged. I guess that in the melee, I must have knocked my phone off the hook. I knew why he was worried now. I don't know what happened that night, but I guess it might have been brought on by overworking perhaps. I don't know though. When I think back to the way those hands felt against my leg, and the way that whatever was down there looked so human, that makes me think that I might have experienced something. I have no idea what the banging sound was, or if it's connected. I hope not. Because if it was, then I imagine that whatever was clinging to my legs might have been clinging onto their life in another time and place. Either way, it was the scariest thing that ever happened to me.